CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor with Anatole Lieven of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He is in England, in Lincolnshire. We are observing the results of the German election so far. A coalition to be formed behind Olaf Scholz, the leader of the SPD, and the present finance minister. So a man who has great credibility with the German people and with the European Union economy. However, I learned from Judy Dempsey of the Carnegie Endowment that one issue that was never addressed adequately to Judy's measure and to many measures was national security for Mrs. Merkel. Why is now we set aside, but what is to be done for Olaf Scholz? This has to do with NATO. This has to do with the suggestion by Macron of France of a European military, something like a European-only NATO. This has to do with relations with Russia. We know that NATO is constantly monitoring the border of the Baltic states and Poland, and that the Cold War is gone, but then again there are the protocols of the Cold War in place. What is Germany's place in this? Anatole, is this a sharp question that must be answered, or the wonderful new German word, Merkeln, which is to kick the can down the road, to procrastinate? Can Olaf Scholz Merkeln-this to the satisfaction of everyone in Europe?
I think he can Merkel it to the dissatisfaction of everybody in Europe, if you see what I mean. Because after all, this is a pattern in Germany now going back a generation or indeed more, much more in certain ways, which is that on the one hand, the Germans feel militarily very, very dependent on the Americans. They are desperately anxious to keep America in Europe for a curious mixture of reasons, all of which come back to distrust of themselves. On the one hand, they distrust the German government does not think that if push comes to shove, the German electorate would go along with any serious military action by the Germans. But then again, of course, equally, Germans, for very understandable historical reasons, have this deep aversion to trying to turn themselves again into a great military power. So there is a kind of built-in paralysis in Germany. Also, there is, of course, worry about Russia. Not nearly as much worry about Russia as in America, but of course worry exists. On the other hand, in the Second World War, the German army lost in one campaign, Stalingrad in the Soviet Union, as many men as America lost in the entire war. The memory of what happens in the event of war with Russia, it remains burned into German public consciousness. And so there is a deep, deep aversion to anything that might risk actual conflict with Russia.
Let us go right to Russia then, because relations between Berlin and Moscow are a many-splendored mystery. We have Nord Stream 2. We have the fact that Angela Merkel is a Russian speaker along with a German speaker. She was raised in East Germany during the Troubles. And Vladimir Putin, the president for some time to come, is a German speaker. He was assigned there by the KGB when he was a serving officer. So they were simpatico for many years, although what does that mean? Because Russia is now seen as a threat for NATO, this is going to oblige Olaf Scholz to either indicate or point directions. What does this mean for Russia? What does this mean for Germany? You have great experience in Russia. Germany as a partner, Germany as an adversary, does that have meaning today?
I think it will probably go on being a mixture, as long as nothing, radically new happens. Because on the one hand, of course, Germany and, with the support not of the Greens, but of the other parties, did, of course, insist on going ahead with Nord Stream in order to guarantee Germany's gas supplies. Germany also regards Russia as a reliable source of gas. That Russia has never actually tried to use the gas supplies to pressure Germany. It's been, it's kept to its contractual word there. It's tried to use the gas supplies to pressure Ukraine, but not Germany. And so on the one hand, you have this dependence, you have this deep fear of conflict with Russia. There is also, of course, in Germany a sort of also hereditary distrust of the Poles, who are regarded as, both pathologically anti-Russian, but also pretty, wild and unreliable. But on the other hand, there is deep dislike of Putin, and his regime, and there is concern about Russia. So I think, what you will see is precisely, more and more kicking the can down the road. And then, of course, but there are two things that could change that. I mean, one is a new crisis in Ukraine, with the new Russian military action there. But something that has really fallen off the radar screen, perhaps to a dangerous degree, is the Balkans. The whole Kosovo issue, between Kosovo, Albania, Kosovo and Serbia remains open. There is, you might even say, a kind of frozen conflict or war there. And part of the question is, could the Germans even be relied on to deploy serious military forces to try to contain a new conflict in the Balkans, which of course they totally failed to do in the early 1990s. The French are also desperately anxious for European help in the Sahel, fighting, Islamist rebels there. The Germans have done almost nothing to help the French there, and after Afghanistan, there is deep underlying unwillingness in Germany to get involved in any more campaigns about of that kind. And so, there is all this talk, and of course very much increased by the dreadful American snub to France over the Australian submarine deal. But I could be wrong, but it seems to me that the underlying patterns of German politics and German public attitudes still point towards a continuation of Merkelism, as you say, kicking down the road.
Kicking Merkel. Anatole Lieven of the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. He's in England, and we're going to turn to England next because the shelves are already emptying. What has happened to Europe's energy supplies and supply chain? This is CBS Eye on the World. I'm John Batchelor.
You're listening to CBS Eye on the World with John Batchelor.
Care has the power to bring kindness where it's needed. It brings out the best in every one of us. It doesn't just see people. It takes time to understand them. It puts the needs of others ahead of its own. And when you start with care, you end up with a very different kind of bank. Truist. Truist Bank, member FDIC.
Whatever you're funny, Peacock's got it exclusively. Stream classic sitcoms like The Office, Parks and Recreation, and 2.5 Men. Plus, catch Peacock original comedies like AP Bio and Saved by the Bell. For all your exclusive comedy faves, go to peacocktv.com and get started.